Right now, in this moment, if someone's watching this podcast, you have all the communication tools you need.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Within the Game podcast. My name is Aaron Wexler, and I'm here with the one and only Brian Gruber. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
It's my great pleasure, Aaron.
Man, this is a full circle moment. And for the audience, Brian, you're my writing coach. And
Yes, I am.
together we created this book, The Inspired Athlete, which we're going to talk about today in this episode. And it's truly a full circle moment for me because, wow, that was a long time and just a long journey. And so, this whole podcast that we started, actually, you helped me create this podcast in the middle of the pandemic. This whole podcast is about staying inspired. And I talk to, athletes, entrepreneurs, champions of life about how we stay inspired within our own craft. And we're going to get into how you stay inspired and how you inspire others through writing. So I'm really excited for this episode. So, Brian, you're a published author, a writing coach, a marketing consultant, and my personal writing coach. And thank you, man. Thank you for everything. And your websites are grubermedia.com and sanscribes.com, which I will link here. And anything further than that, give everyone a little quick background of yourself before we continue.
Yeah, I'm a projects boy from housing projects boy from Brooklyn, New York. Grew up in the public schools there, Queens College. Went to grad school in your neighborhood, Pepperdine University, and was interested in new media and emerging new forms of media. And I spent most of my career in the cable television industry on the marketing and executive side here, and also being the first head of marketing for the Australian cable TV rollout, Foxtel. But also did some on-air work. I was the first head of marketing for C-SPAN in my 20s, and also hosted 2 live call-in shows a week. And so, as I find it an extraordinary privilege to draw out people's stories. And then, as the internet was growing in the 90s and beyond, started to consult for startups and did my own 2 startups, which later on we can talk about. And one was public affairs, elite conferences online. The other was live streaming from iconic jazz clubs around the world. And started writing 11 years ago when I came to our beloved island, Koh Phangan, a small Thai island famous for a number of things. And it was really a transformative experience for me. And I loved this island so much. And then briefly did a second book, War of the After Party, traveling around the world to scenes of U.S. military interventions of the last half century, and ended up on the Cambodian coast and then moved here to Koh Phangan. So that's how I got to this island. And that's how I decided to shift my career from marketing and packaging other people's content in digital media and cable TV to telling stories that I wanted to tell and helping people tell stories that they want to tell.
Man. And, yes, you are in Thailand right now, and I'm in Los Angeles. And like I said, this is a full circle moment. So we're going to talk about the whole story of how we met and this whole journey that we've been on together, creating this project, the Inspired Athlete. But before we do that, I always like to start with this question with all my guests. What does inspired living mean to you?
Yeah, I think part of that is having a vision that you've really thought about for your life and getting specific about it, knowing that it's going to evolve over time, but having a North Star, so to speak, saying, I'm going to do lots of different things. I'm going to fail at some, but here's who I am. And here's the life that I want to live Tuesday, 3 p.m. What am I doing with my life? And so to me, inspiration comes from a sense of purpose and from a vision, and then working to live that vision. And I think one draws inspiration from that.
Love it. I love it, man. You know what? I just feel so honored to have met you, and just to have been on this journey with you. And for the audience, who might be thinking like, okay, Aaron usually interview athletes and entrepreneurs. Why are you having a writer on? Well, Brian has been just a catalyst for my own personal growth during this time of when I decided to become a writer, an author, and now I'm a published author, which is I still have to pinch myself um to actually realize that. But I just have to just give you so much gratitude for that. And let's get into some of this content about writing as a game, because this whole podcast journey that I took on in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of my writing process, which is, I kind of looked at life and I looked at disciplines and crafts, and I was like, you know what, it's all a game if you look at it like that, you choose to look at it like that. So yeah, so going back to the question, writing as a discipline, how do you look at it as a game?
I think there are several crossovers. I watched the Kansas City Chiefs Cardinals game yesterday, the first game of the year, and watched how Patrick Mahomes performed. And yes, he's a great athlete, but he's also a tremendous artist. What he does is artful. So I think there's crossovers going both ways. Some similarities. I think if you're going to do a book like you did, you have to have a rock solid commitment to getting to the goal line. There's a lot of athletes, as you know, in the NFL or NBA, who can do good for the first three quarters, but there's something that sports commentators talk about finishing. And why is that so important? It's psychologically difficult. And so I think in the course of writing, most people don't complete their projects as you have done. So looking at it as a game, knowing that there's going to be challenges, you're going to be tackled at the 2-yard line, you're going to fumble the ball, you thought you had a game plan, and I didn't write anything for the last 2 weeks. But having a strong commitment, I'm going to get to that goal line, I have a plan for getting there, and nothing's going to stop me. And I think it gets back to your original notion of inspiration. Why am I doing this? And I think certainly, athletes are really about winning. We've talked about this a lot, and your book talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
Got to be about winning. But I think the people who you interviewed, the podcasts I listened to and the interviews that I read, those people had a much more expansive sense of what winning was about. And that was part of the reason for the success. So I think those things are somewhat similar, and to some degree, some similar challenges.
Right. So eloquently said. And I agree. And, and that, again, that's the idea of this whole project, right? Is to have fun, right? We were talking before this interview, like, let's have fun with it. And, like, when I undertook this whole process, and when I made a decision, I was like, all right, Aaron, like, let's write this book, right? I had this idea. I was like, man, can I really do that? And I had to just battle self-doubt during this whole process. And, we went through so much. Like, look, this is one of the early, drafts, and we got it to this, and there's so many different decisions along the way, and so much, like, just moments where you have to challenge yourself. And you, like you said, you have to, like, I'll be honest with you, and for the listeners, like, I didn't know if I could finish this thing. There were many months actually where you were like, hey, are you there? It's crickets. Hey, Aaron, what's going on? And I think, for a lot of first-time writers, they may be going through that. What do you say to first-time writers like myself, right? Like who are like, wondering if they could really do a project like this, or do a project. I
think very similar to getting into a sport, you have to start by asking the why. Because if you don't answer the why and have that solidly set, then all those defensive backs that are tackling you're gonna want to give up. You lose your sense of purpose, you lose your sense of where you're going. So I do a free hour of writing coaching to people on the island, besides this event that I'm going to do tonight. Been doing for 5 years, a free weekly event called Write Night, which is how we met, and it gives me great joy to do that. And in those writing sessions and coaching sessions, it really is about not that people don't have the communication tools, or an athlete doesn't have the physical tools, but it's demystifying the process and giving people a sense of confidence of what the tasks are and how to get there.
Right.
So that's really important. What's the why? What's the motivation? And then having a vision of the outcome. Why do you want this finished book? Because you, for example, among many other things, yeah, you're really excited about having that book in your hand, but that represents something broader to you, that you've experienced certain things in your life on and off the field, and you have this burning, passionate, beautiful desire to share that with people. You just want to share that with people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
once you nurture that, once a writer decides what's the story that they want to pursue in their book, what's the thing that they want to write about, that provides a lot of the motivation to take it to completion.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I was thinking about, Brian, leading up to this talk is, I've always thought that everybody has a message, but I'm not sure about that. And before you answer this question, you know, I believe that people do. I feel like we all have a unique message. But I'm a spiritual person, and I believe part of our spiritual journey is to come share that message, whatever that message is. What do you think about that? Do you think that we all have a message? And if we do you think we all need to share that message in some capacity?
When I was raising money for the live jazz startup, I went to this venture capitalist in Seattle, and I had just done this public forum startup, and I was saying these are two very different things. He said, no, they're not. We became Homo sapiens when we gathered around a fire and we told stories to each other, and then later on someone figured out to start tapping a tune out on a log or a drum or whatever. So it's deeply innate within us as storytellers. Our pedigree, our heritage is as storytellers, and we all can tell stories. So every person has had a body of life experience and a prism through which they've seen the world, experienced the world, that nobody else has.
Right.
There's, for better or for worse, man, there's only one Aaron Wexler in the world. There's only one person who's had your body of experience. Now, you can decide to devalue that. You can decide to say, none of my stories, none of the things that I've experienced cumulatively have value. That's a choice that you can make. But all of us have stories to tell, which is why almost all of us can't stop freaking gossiping and going to media and telling stories. Now, I think many great movies, for example, are about some janitor who these high-end scientists see, every night cleaning the floors.
Good Will
and
Hunting.
then suddenly they find out that person has an extraordinary life story.
Yeah.
So I don't believe there's anyone who does not have extraordinary defining moments in their life and things to share with other people that are worth sharing. The separate question is whether someone wants to say, I want to document that and collate it in a way that I can share that and memorialize that.
Yeah, it's a daunting task, and I'll say that firsthand. And like when we met, and I'm actually gonna share how we met with everybody. I wanna kind of paint the picture, but before I do that, I just wanted to say, like, it's a daunting task when you decide, right? You're like, okay, I got a message inside me, and for me, my message was stay inspired, right? Stay inspired, because, and I'll tell you why. Because as an athlete, and hopefully this resonates with any athlete who might be listening to this, it's hard to stay inspired sometimes. It's hard, sometimes you just want to stop. You're like, man, I'm done, as an athlete, because for whatever reason, whether it's an injury or just lack of motivation or whatever it may be, or burnout, a lot of athletes experience that. But, I had this message that was, I think it was a divine message. I think it came through me, which was like, hey, stay inspired in it doesn't even have to be athletically. It could just be in life, right? Find a way to stay inspired, find a way to keep that inspiration going. So that was my message, but it was a daunting task to like you said, to like put it all together and package it, and Yeah, so I'm so grateful that I met you, because you really helped me put that together. And but before I kind of talk more about how we met, and because I do want to share that, um, you know, if someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I hear you, I got a message too, but I don't even know where to start. What advice do you have to that person? Like, how do you even start to put together your message as a package?
I mean, there's several dimensions to that, question. I mean, one is, as with anything else in life, you might need support. That might be your lover, your friend, your parent, your cousin, might be a writing class, might be an online YouTube series, or a book, might be a writing coach or a writing group, or whatever. I mean, ultimately, it gets back to what you were just talking about. It gets to some internal dialogue, as to, do I have stories that are worth sharing, and in what form do I want to share them? So I think if someone, as I was sharing, that what usually happens in the initial coaching session is it's about removing that psychological barrier that your stories are not worth telling, and demystifying the process. Oh, I can't, we think about a book and it's like some mysterious process as to how to tell those stories, or how to do a book. I was talking to a woman the other day in a session like that, and all of us are telling these stories every day. I mean, what's a book? I mean, what's every day you are telling these long stories. Most people who are posting on Instagram and Facebook all the time have like written War and Peace 3 times this year already. So every day we're speaking, using spoken word, we're telling these stories, and there's even speech to text transcribers now, where if all you do is record those, and then you upload it to Amazon as an ebook, and you can do all that in 30 minutes, you have a book. Of course, you
Right.
want to polish it a little, you want to develop, you want to edit it, you want to get it in as fine a form as you can. But I think demystifying that process, starting with, why do I want to tell these stories? And then, what's the plumbing? We think of it, oh, I'm going to wait for the muse or whatever. A lot of it is just simply plumbing, where you have to know if you're going to fix a pipe under your sink. It looks very daunting until no, you just open the cabinet under the sink, you take this wrench, you tighten it here, and you just fixed your leak. Sometimes it's more than that. But what that plumber knows is how to use those tools, a little more sophisticated than you are possibly, on how to use those tools. They fixed that identical leak 74 times before, and they know what are the steps in order to do that, and therefore it doesn't become as daunting.
Right. So here's an interesting point, Brian. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, so Aaron's talking about a message, Brian's talking about stories. What's the crossover there? Right? Because, like you said, everyone's got a story, but what's the difference between a message and stories? Does that make
All
sense?
right, my athlete daughter, Andrea, big track star in high school, got a scholarship to a University of California school. She's got 2 lovely grandchildren, lovely children, 4-year-old Silas, 1-year-old Cecilia. And Silas every night wanted me to read him the same damn story, The Three Little Pigs. And I did, and it was fun. So there's a story called The Three Little Pigs. What's the message? The message is, don't be cheap ass and lazy when you're building your house.
Right, right.
Use good materials and make sure it's pretty strong, so that when the big bad wolf comes around, he doesn't eat you. And
Right.
there's all kinds of moral messages in there, for better or for worse. So there's a message in Three Little Pigs, and that message appealed to my grandson, and he wanted to hear it over and over again. And I mean, does a book have a message? I mean, any book or any story of any length, as I was saying with The Three Little Pigs, has embedded in it many messages, value statements, lessons learned, etc. And I think the message for a book, usually there's, just like in acting, there's a through line. What is that actor or actress want to accomplish by the end of that play or movie or TV show, and that's their objective. So a book might have a through line usually that says, as you were talking about before, how to be inspired on and off the court, and the way that you did it, which was masterful, is I'm gonna give the Aaron Wexler point of view on that, and you get that in the book, and it's good. I'm also gonna harvest the point of view of 36 brilliant, accomplished, wise, and communicative athletes and coaches and others. And then, is there a message in the book? I'm pretty sure if you read that book, you're going to see some messages, but you also leave, what's his name? The guy who wrote Moneyball, Michael Lewis. I once met him and asked him a question about a book. And I was saying how people look at this book so differently. And what he said was, I always leave a reader-sized hole in the book for people to draw their own conclusions. So someone can read your book, and yes, they're going to get the uber message about being inspired. No doubt. You just scan it a little bit, read a few paragraphs, you're going to pull out this juicy value. But within that, anyone is going to come to that book with their own life experience, and then they're going to draw out the message in their own way that resonates with them.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Okay, I want to take this opportunity to like explain to the listeners and viewers how we met. So I was in Thailand on a trip in 2019, pre-pandemic, and I was traveling by myself, and I went to this place called Orion. Now, Orion is this awesome retreat center, beautiful. It's like out of a postcard. And I was sitting there by myself, just sipping a really nice green juice, just feeling really inspired. And I was actually looking at my journal, looking at my notes, and I saw all these people come into this ashram, which is like beautiful yoga studio right on the water. And I asked someone, is this like a yoga class? What's going on? And they said, oh, it's a creative writing workshop and it's free. And I said, wow, interesting. So I asked if I could join. Obviously, you were leading it, and you said, come on in. I think it was about 20 people or so, maybe more, maybe 30. And it was a great workshop. It was awesome. And specifically for someone who is not a writer, right? At that moment, I never identified myself as a writer. I identified myself as a athlete and a coach and an entrepreneur, right? Traveler, adventurer, but writer was like this daunting title, but it was really interesting to me. I was like, man, I'd love to be a writer. Actually, that actually would be really cool. So I took the class. It was really fun, made it really fun. And then you made this really cool offer, which you had mentioned, which you say, if anyone has a project you'd like me to look at, I'm offering an hour of my time for free. I can look at your project. So I took you up on that. I think it was the next night. And we had a little Thai food, and you looked at my project, and I'll never forget it because you said, oh, you have something here, man. Maybe you might have something here, but I want to tell the audience what I had. So what I had at that moment was a bunch of notes, and they were kind of all over the place. They weren't really organized. They were like kind of organized. But I remember showing you that, and I think you were just like, okay, where are we going with this? What are we going to do with this? And so after that hour consult, I said, you know what, you're my guy. And, from then on, I hired you to be my writing coach. And fast forward 3 years later, we got to this point where we have this book. And I just wanted to share that with the audience because, sometimes you don't have a plan. Like I didn't have a plan. I didn't plan to like go meet a writing coach. My plan was to go on this trip and to just follow the flow. Quite honestly, I didn't even know about Orion, where you were at that time. And I followed the flow. And I just, this whole podcast and, what's in this book is kind of about that. It's about following the flow. And again, I share that story to hopefully inspire someone who might be listening to this to just follow the flow, not necessarily have a plan, because sometimes when you do that, the plan unravels itself it unveils itself, which is what happened with us, you know.
I saw Dahlia Barkin yesterday at Orion, and I told her that we talked, and I told her you mentioned Orion, and she
Yeah,
was proud of you for doing the book, and so excited that Orion was a breeding ground for a project like yours.
it's a beautiful place. And you know what, Brian, I am going to come back, and I'm going to come back, and I would like to come into the writers workshop, and I'd like to share my story with
Sure.
anyone
Yeah.
who might be discouraged, right? Let's talk about discouragement for a second, before we get to.
Can I respond to a couple
Yeah.
of other
Oh,
things
yeah, for sure.
that you said, which
Yeah.
are important? First of all, when people first come to Write Night, there's like this mantra. It's like, well, I'm not a writer. And
Yeah.
then I show a video of a famous author. We talk about it. Everyone shares what they're reading and writing. And then we write off a prompt allowing people to prove to themselves, oh, I just wrote a story in 30 minutes. And then some people are sensitive about sharing. Most people do share. People certainly share by the second time they come. Why? Because we live in a global, I'm a lifelong marketer and media person. We live in a marketing culture where we're getting messages all the time that if you're not in the New York Times bestseller list, you don't have stories that have value. If you can't play the guitar like Keith Richards, you should not be playing the guitar. It's the commercial culture that we've received hundreds of thousands of messages, intentionally or not. So to some degree, there's a bit of psychological liberation to say, you've been writing for 30 years, you're saying you're not a writer, you're a storyteller. All of us have stories to tell. So that's one thing. The other thing briefly I wanted to say is most people might finish a book like yours in 9 to 12 months, whatever. You did it in 3 years. When we first started, I said something to you, and I say this to everyone, and I know it's true for me in the 5 books that I wrote, that there's this concept I first read about in this book by this great psychologist and author, Kathleen Brahoni. She talks about the tension between opposites, meaning you have two opposite ideas, say one in each hand, and you hold both of them, even though they seem opposite. So on one hand, we're saying, you got to look at the goalposts and you got to have a steely-eyed vision. I'm going to get to that goalpost. I'm going to get to that finish line. I'm going to get this done. On the other hand, in the creative process and in life, sometimes in general, you have to embrace the notion often that the book will take as long as the book wants to take. And, we're going to talk about the podcast later where, you started a podcast in the middle of it. And yes, I did ask you periodically. And at a certain point, once, agreements get out of the way, how are we going to work together? Your project becomes my project. And so if you work with me, that thing damn well is going to get finished. So we talked, and I always had, there were a couple of moments there over 3 years, but I always had the confidence that you really cared about this book that you wanted to write. And, life interferes, and but the book will take the amount of time that the book wants to take. There's this great Australian jazz club owner in Lapa in Rio de Janeiro, amazing clubs called Tri-Boss. He's Australian. He wrote this thick book about samba, authoritative book about samba. He took 19 years to write it.
Yeah.
Could he have written it in 19 months? I don't know.
Right.
But he finished, and it's an incredible book. So on one hand, having this determination to complete, which is so important, and on the other hand, being kind to yourself and allowing the creative process to unfold in the way it's going to unfold.
Right. Man. Okay, there's a couple things I want to unfold here before we move on. So I actually distinctly remember I actually came to 2 Write Nights because I was there for 2 weeks. So the first one is when I think we met. The second one, I was like, I came back and we did a prompt about, I think back then it was the forest fires, the in the Amazon. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember you gave these really great prompts, because again, for someone who's not a professional writer, you know, for a rookie writer, again, like this is it's tough to just free write, you know, but I wanted to acknowledge the way that you gave the prompts. And for someone listening, they might be like, okay, prompts, wait, you mean like in school when like the teacher gives you a prompt to do an essay? Kind of like that. But you had given this creative writing workshop prompt, which is like, here's the prompt back. And my example was this, back then there was these really crazy fires in I think it was Brazil, maybe.
Yeah, in the Amazon.
In the Amazon, yeah. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, if you remember, but like some of the prompts were like, how, you know, what are your thoughts about this? What, you know, how is this affecting your life? Or it was, I can't exactly remember what it was, but
I might have even used that as an introduction.
yeah.
And then the writing prompt might have just been the Amazon, or the Amazon is broken, and then people take that as a prompt and go in any direction that they want with it. And the wonderful thing is you have a dozen people who all write completely different stories because they're getting that prompt in through the prism of their own life experience.
Yeah. And I just want to say that really helped me, man, because, you know, I wasn't even thinking about those forest fires. I had heard about it. I heard about them in the news, you know, but when you give a prompt like that and you're in this we were kind of in a meditative zone, right? Where you're like, just kind of trying to allow the words to come through you, you know. But when you get a prompt like that, it really helps to just free write. And that's what we did. We did a free write for, I think, a long time. I want to say 30 minutes or so. And you were able to just sit back and just kind of let the process go. And some people were writing really fast and some people were just sitting there thinking. And I just thought it was really powerful, you know, and you know, it's really nice to be led in a exercise like that, right? Because now when I write, sometimes it's hard, man. I actually enjoy writing now, you know, after everything we've been through together. I do, but it's difficult. It's not easy. It doesn't really flow all the time. There's days that go by when I don't write, you know.
Yeah,
and then there's
the writing prompts are great. I attended a travel writing class in San Francisco at a place called the Grotto, and everyone else there, and I was only, I don't know why, I was the only guy in the class. Everyone else there were much more experienced writers than I was, so I was intimidated. And when the prompt was given out, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to write my thing. And then some of these women in the class started reading their stories, and I'm like, damn, my story's better than theirs. And I read mine, and then after that, I was like, I want to read my story, because something flipped within me from my story has no value to I have a story that I want to tell. And the writing prompt is a great exercise, because during those 30 minutes, you got nothing else to do. So something happens to me and to most people psychologically where, you know, there's nothing else to do. So you write that story. And we all have this tsunami of stories within us. We all have tens of thousands of stories. And what that does, and I think we talk about the similarity to athletics, what that does is that process of giving out a prompt and giving 30 minutes to do nothing else but write in a safe environment allows you to get out of your own way, similar to an athlete saying, there's no way I could do, you know, run around the track all those times faster than other people. And then you start to break it down, and then you start to do it. And then, you know, you look behind you, you know, hold on a second, I just won this race, you know.
Yeah.
That triggers something within you to say, no, I can't do this, you know, but you got to put yourself in the game first, whether it's fighting or whether it's in athletics.
I love that. And you know what, man? Look, there's something liberating about creative writing, right? There's no rules. There's no rules. And you know, that's the difference in sports, right? In sports, there's all kinds of rules. But to creatively write and express yourself and allow words to go, I want to make this talk relatable to athletes and entrepreneurs who might be listening and are like, what? How is this related? How is this relatable? The reason why it's relatable is because it actually lets your mind go for a little bit. That was my experience, right? My whole life I've been on like regimented. Okay, go to practice, go to games, show up, be very disciplined, be very goal oriented. Those are all good things. But to have this experience, man, to not just the experience on the island and to go through the creative writing workshops, but to have the experience of you coaching me, across the world on different time zones through this writing process, which was a creative writing process for me. It was, you
Yeah.
know and yes, there's a lot of quotes by accomplished people, and there's like daily tips and stuff like that in there. But there were moments, I'll just be real, there were moments where I went to a local coffee shop over here, and I sat there and I just free wrote, and you really helped me get into that zone. And any athlete or entrepreneur listening to this, I recommend you guys do that. Get in a zone so that you can free write. You can create your own prompt. You can find a writing coach like Brian. You can hire Brian himself, but get into a place where you can allow yourself to just write, even if it doesn't make sense, even if there's typos. Like, let it go. Let those words flow.
Yeah. There's a famous Greek story of a a priestess of some Greek goddess cult who lived on this island across the Dardanelles Strait. And there was a dude by the name of Hero. And every night, because it was forbidden for them to be together, right? So every night he would swim across the Dardanelles Strait to be with her, and then swim back before the morning. And then one time the currents were too strong and the guy died. And that's where we get the name Hero. Now, my complaint about that story is, why is the woman the hero and the guy, and she gets the name, and the dude who drowned in this incredible romantic effort to see his lover every night, he doesn't get all the credit. But what is it to be a hero? There's a guy by the name of Joseph Campbell, who's pretty famous, and he wrote a book called Hero of a Thousand Faces. And he talks about the monomyth, about this myth that's in all the world's great cultures and all the great hero stories. And the heroic journey is similar throughout, and we're most familiar with stories like Odysseus, where Odysseus leaves the safe shore to go out to unknown lands, encounters all kinds of threats and challenges, many times thinking he will never get back home. I think the dude was away for like 20 years or something, and then finally he brings back his victory and gets back home. So I think athletes have that. Why do we consider athletes heroes? Because we know that to get where they are, and we see it on our television screens, that they have to endure and get over all kinds of extraordinary challenges that almost sometimes look like impossible.
Right.
And they do. That's why the stories of Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes or whoever, Michael Jordan, winning in the last 2 or 3 minutes, we hear those stories more than in the beginning of the second quarter. That was a really great run by that running back. So similarly with writing, and what you were engaged in and experienced, in my view, was a heroic journey. You started the journey. It was not safe. You were saying yourself, how can I do this? You were challenging your own ego. And most of us like, enough. I got enough ego challenges in this world. I don't need another one to dwell on every day. But you engaged in that. And to some degree, it's like, oh, it took 2 or 3 years to do the book. But actually, that to me is more heroic. Through those challenges, through all that time, you stayed the course, and you brought back the win. So to some degree, I think for those people who are looking for inspiration, there's a challenge there, but there's a kind of mythic opportunity to say, I have a story that's important to share with the world. Might be my life story, might be whatever it is, but for the species to continue, evolve, and advance, we need stories.
Yeah.
And we need stories.
Yeah. And thank you for those words, man. And I wanted to contribute. I actually, like, look at all these books behind me, right? Like, I wanted to contribute to the collective. I wanted to put this there, and this will be there long after I'm gone, and that's part of what I wanted. I wanted legacy out of this whole thing. And I actually want to get into intimidation and discouragement. Those are two things that happened to me during this process. Those are very real things. You look back here, you meet someone like yourself, who's an accomplished writer, and it actually looks like it comes very easy to you and everything. So there's an intimidation factor that I went through, and I'm like, I'm intimidated here. I do want this, but I'm intimidated, So I'd like you to touch on that for a first-time writer. And then I also want you to follow that up with discouragement, because that happened to me as well, right? Like halfway through my writing process, I'm like, I'm over it. I don't want to. I actually don't want to do this anymore because I'm discouraged, because writer's block, right? We didn't even talk about that. Like, I'd like you to tie in writer's block with those two things.
Yeah, I mean, intimidation, you should embrace that. If you're intimidated, it means you're doing something worth doing. If you're not intimidated, that means there's nothing to learn, there's nothing to be challenged by, and it's not worth doing. So on the other side of intimidation is to look back and see when you were intimidated, and then you had that learning and you had that experience of surpassing that. So gets back to a sense of purpose, gets back to inspiration and knowing why you want to get to that goal line. And discouragement, I mean, you might meet the Cyclops who wants to eat you. You might meet the sirens who want to have sex with you in a Greek Isle and then eat you. You might have all these, storms, etc. To some degree, the reason why we have those myths is those are part of our life process when we pursue things that are challenging. And then you can also decide to be realistic too. Will I set aside the time? Are there skills I need to get? Do I need support? Do I need to write an 800-page book, or is a 40-page manual giving the basic thing that I want to write enough? One thing about creative platforms now, is it's not just waiting for Simon & Schuster to decide what's in our book and publish our book and what it should be called. We have all these platforms. You can write a 3-part series on medium.com. You can do a blog, you can do a podcast. So we live at a time that is the most extraordinary creative time in human history. So you can also say with an assessment similar to an athlete, I might want to say, I want to be the next center for the Boston Celtics. Well, ain't gonna happen. But if I want to say, I haven't played basketball for a long time, I'm gonna go to LA, or I think you know something about volleyball, as I recall, and I love volleyball, but I haven't played volleyball for years. I wasn't that good when I played. So I might want to say, when I'm in LA, I want Aaron to take me to a game on the beach, on Manhattan Beach, and show me a few tips. And then I want to be in a volleyball game with Aaron, knowing that there's no way I want to be Aaron Wexler. So that's a goal that's achievable. And there's a guy here on the island in Hadrin who has a volleyball league. So I might decide what is achievable is that I'm going to go to 10 volleyball games. I'm going to watch a few YouTube videos. And then when I go see Aaron, it will be achievable for me not to embarrass myself and have fun, because that's my goal, as opposed to saying, I want to be on the US Olympic team in volleyball in the next cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I want to follow up on that, because those are real emotions: intimidation, discouragement. FOPO is another one that I kind of discovered: fear of other people's opinions, right? Like, how am I going to be judged from this? Are people going to like this? Are people going to just say, what are you doing? And that was a big thing. Actually, that's a big thing for athletes too, like, and entrepreneurs, right? Like, we all have to be like, no, I'm not going to worry about those things. I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to stay tunnel visioned on my goal, my dream, and that's what it takes, right? And because if you get caught up in those thoughts, you get derailed. And it definitely happened to me 100%. You know, there were moments where I was like, dude, you know, how am I going to be looked at? How's this going to, how's my image going to change, you know, with all those things, with this book,
But
all
isn't
those.
that also similar to an athlete, that on one
Yeah.
hand, you don't want to lose. You don't
Right.
want to be you don't want someone, slamming a volleyball in your face. You don't want to let down your team, all that. But at a certain point, I would imagine, for an athlete like yourself and those who you've interviewed and and played with, at a certain point, you're playing against your own standard. And if you're
Yeah.
thinking constantly about people in the stands, what they're thinking about you, game over. You're in
Right.
big trouble. But if you're competing against your highest self and your highest standards, then you're going to be on. You're going to be more likely to be in that flow. Very similar to writing. I often talk to people about two different buckets. Again, we live in this marketing culture where when I did the War of the After Party book, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan and Cambodia and all these places. And 90% of the questions I got when I got back after traveling around the world, exploring why America is always at war, is how many books did you sell? They didn't care that I was 20 miles outside of ISIS-controlled Mosul in Iraq, or I spent a month in Kabul, Afghanistan. They wanted to know how many books I sold. So if that
Yeah.
was my purpose, I had an inquiry in that book that I wanted to explore. So similarly, there's sort of two buckets when you're writing something. The first one is the one to be focused on. What's the story I want to tell? How am I going to tell that story? How do I take it to completion? And then you worry about the second bucket, which you're worrying about now. We talked
Yeah.
about that week,
Yeah.
how many do I want to sell? How am I going to promote it? What does it look like? What does the cover look like? Et cetera. But the starting point, I would think, whether you're an athlete or a writer, is what is my standard and how do I achieve and work doing the best I can with the tools I have against that standard.
I love that, man. I love that. Let's talk about mindset, because a big part of this project and the big part of this book that we did and the big part of this whole podcast and the big part of this whole conversation is mindset. Talk about the mindset of an inspired writer.
Yeah, some of it is mundane, similar to a writer. Before you can have the right mindset, you might want to have the right tools on your desk. You might want to create the right environment to yourself with the same cup of
Huge,
coffee,
huge.
or the same time of day. Just like an athlete might say, I'm going to do my running, 6:30 in the morning. If you say, I'm going to do the running when I feel like it tomorrow, you're in trouble. So creating the right environment starts there. And we talked also about the idea of purpose and motivation. So we've covered that, but another part of that is to try, if there's a spectrum for writing, as with many athletes and many Olympians recently, had, a stress or anxiety attack, and had to remove themselves from a game. So I think an important thing for me, maybe not for other people, but we certainly have talked about this, is if there's a spectrum with joy on one part of it and stress on the other, you want to be as close as possible to the joy part. You're not going to be in the extreme end of that spectrum and the joy part all the time. There'll be some stress, but if it's always stressful, if it's always unpleasant, if it's always grueling, then you are more likely not to complete that. So finding, again, whether it's with a writing coach or a lover or reading the right book or being in the right physical environment, going to the Earth Cafe or whatever it is,
Yeah.
being in a space mentally and physically where it's a joyful experience is really important, because if it's not fun, you probably are not going to complete it. And so going through that mental exercise to think, why am I doing this, and how to create an environment and how to approach things so that I am at that joy end of the spectrum is important. And the related thing to that Aaron, as we talked about too, is people have this notion that the muse, some Greek goddess, is going to come to you, and you don't have to do the work. You're just going to wait until you're inspired. And you certainly want to put yourself in a position of being inspired, and there will be moments of great inspiration, peak moments where the key things you want to say in the book, you get clarity on, and you need that, and you're going to have that. But also, if you don't show up to that laptop at the time you said you were on your calendar repeatedly, then if that muse, if that mythic Greek goddess is watching you and they're seeing that you're not showing up, they're going to your neighbor's house, they ain't hanging around for you.
You really helped me with that, actually, because I had heard somewhere when I started this writing process, I think after I came back to the United States shortly after we met, I had heard somewhere that was like, only write when you're inspired, and you really helped me with no, schedule your writing, schedule it,
Yeah.
and then see if you get inspired, but you have it on your calendar, so it kind of like, just like a practice for an athlete, or like a scheduled meeting, it's in the calendar, so that's the time that I'm gonna devote to the writing. But I wanted to just really quick share my process. So when I did go to the coffee shop, prior to doing that, I would work out. I would try to get a little charged up,
Very
get the
important.
yeah, I would either do a
Blood
walk.
to the brain.
Yeah,
Blood to the brain. Your
and
body
even during
prepare.
and even during the pandemic, when everything shut down, I would walk a lot. I would listen to music, get charged up first, try to get the blood flow, and then go sit down and devote. And when I devoted time to writing, it was only about 15 to 20 minutes at a time. I couldn't do more than that. Some writers, some writers take more time. They do hours at a time, or but for me, I did this little exercise where I would do 20 minutes of, that's my devoted time. Out of those 20 minutes, I'd probably use about 15 minutes to actually do free writing. Then I would break for about 5 to 10 minutes, go walk around, and I would try to come back on a second round. Maybe I did and maybe I didn't, but that was it. I didn't do more than that, and that's why it took me so long, right? Because like I couldn't really get back into it after that first or second 20-minute session.
And that's okay if you have your eyes on the prize and you get to completion, and therefore, back to your comment before, discouragement is part of it.
Yeah.
Intimidation is part of it. And what I often say to people, that's not an impediment to the process, or really sorry that's happening to you. That is the process. That's part of the process. And again, if one chooses to look at it that way, that's part of this heroic journey, that I know that I'm going to do something worth doing. And because it's worth doing, there's going to be challenges to me. And, one thing that I said to a woman who I'm working with the other day, who's writing a travel book for young women traveling solo. And, I sent her in an email, just a brief message that once you, at 23 years old, complete this book, and it's a great book, you will have demystified the process. You've known that you've taken it to completion. You'll have had this great credential for life. And also then you'll have the confidence, whether it's 6 months from now or 16 years from now, to say whatever, and it may not be a book, but whatever the challenge or the creative process is, I can take this to completion. Just like my daughter Andrea was such a great track and field athlete in high school, and she has gone through so many wonderful career opportunities where she was challenged, as an EMT or a firefighter or various things. Once you have had that experience as an athlete or a writer, it demystifies the process, and you know that you can do it again.
Yes. And I have that feeling now about doing a podcast. Like I could help someone start a podcast. I want to help you start yours, like, because I have the knowledge now, but yeah, a couple more things, Brian. So okay, so going back to the writing process, so and then a little intimidation factor. So my roommate Al Brown, he's a PhD, he's a great writer, he's very, very smart. I was intimidated when I first moved in here, and I started talking to him about he started throwing out all these big words all the time, and then he actually runs an online class for writing. So in my other room, I overhear him talking all this, like actually teaching writing, and it's intimidating because I'm like, man, like, am I doing the right thing? And then there was another thing that came up to me. A really good friend of mine, Clayton Joseph Scott. He's a great writer. Like, words come to him so easily. He's a musician, but he's able to write songs like easy. And like, I tried writing 2 songs in like the last couple of years, and I still haven't completed them. And so that I wanted to mention those 2 things, because when sometimes we surround ourselves with people who are really just way better than us at writing, specifically, whether it's a song or a book or an essay or whatever it may be, it's difficult to say, okay, that's them. I'm going to try to get inspired by them, but I'm not going to try to get intimidated by them.
Right.
And I wanted, and going back to acknowledging you do a phenomenal job at empowering your client. You're empowering me to say, no, you got it. You use your own voice. Here's some tools. You do a great job of saying, okay, this is some organizational tools, but get into your own voice. And that's the message of my little rant right here, which is to say, when someone is discouraged or intimidated, those are okay. That, like you said, that's part of the process. But like, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that too much. Get through that quickly so you can get back to the flow. The flow, to me, is my next thing I want to talk to you about. The
Sure.
flow.
Hold on one second.
Yeah,
Two
yeah, yeah.
things
Yeah.
From what you said.
Yeah.
Very important, I think.
Yeah.
And a great anecdote there. One is, it's natural to look at other people and hopefully get inspired by them and to learn from them. But the starting point has to be that right now, in this moment, if someone's watching this podcast, you have all the communication tools you need to tell your story, and you have all the stories that you need to tell stories. Your story is worth telling. Now, you start at that point. That PhD guy and that songwriter guy, they have all the tools they need to tell the stories they want to tell with the toolkit they have, the skill set they have right now. And you do too. So if you're thinking about, I don't have their skill set, then you're in big trouble. But if you think, I have had all these privileges, all this education, all this learning, all these people blessing me with their wisdom or experience or understanding, you have all the tools you have to tell stories now. And again, you're telling stories every day. And the other thing is that, the song, you look at any great songwriter. That's why I show those videos in the Right Night. To me, almost without exception, if not without exception, John Legend talking about songwriting, or Neil Gaiman talking about writing, or Billy Collins talking about poetry, all of them will say, when I go back and look at the stuff that I wrote, 15 years ago, I'm embarrassed by it, because they've been on a journey where they have expanded their toolkit. So what I'm trying to say is 2 brief things. One, you have all the tools that you have now, but great news, if you start writing now and start to hone your craft now, then next week and next month and 12 years from now, you're going to have even better tools. So enable yourself to write now. You have all you need. And if you have an aspiration to be better, there's 2 ways. The 2 best ways to become a better writer are free. One is to read a lot, and one is to write a lot. So that opportunity is there if you want to pursue it.
Yes, man. Yes. And okay, look, one thing that's coming up for me in my mind right now is we're living in such a digital age. Like, look what we're doing right now. We're on Zoom, right? Like, we spend so much time on our screens. I actually think having a actual book right now, to put your eyes on paper rather than a screen, is actually more valuable than ever.
Yeah.
I saw someone reading a book on the beach the other day. I was like, yes, good. like get out of the screens for a minute, and get into the paper. It's actually good for your eyes, so it's
Yeah,
just, yeah, I think anyone listening to this who might be considering writing a book, Brian and I are both saying do it, do
yep.
it, and go for
Find the
it.
platform or the path or the context or the story of what you want to tell. And talking about the muse again, there's one thing I'd add to that, which is if you, like Aaron, at a certain point just feel called, call it what you will, call it soul, whatever. But if you feel this hunger
Yeah.
in you to want to express something, then two things are true. One, you have a story to tell, now is the time to tell it. And that's a tremendous gift to have that hunger. And two, if you don't nurture that and feed it and do anything about it, you'll lose it.
Right.
So if you're having a feeling that I have a story to tell, I have a book I want to write, I have some genre of creativity within which I want to create, now is the time to feed that in some form, or to start feeding it in some form. Or again, the muse thing, the muse will be like, dude, I'm inspiring you. I've
Yeah.
inspired you again. I've inspired you. I gave you the dream thing. I gave you all these synchronicity things that are happening. All right. And then if you don't do it, that mythic concept of the muse might slip away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to fire up for a second before we go on the flow. I know we're going over our time a little bit, but look, for anyone listening who's a coach, or who anyone listening who has to show up to work and punch the clock, right? Like I did for a long time, right? I'm getting a little emotional thinking about that, because like that's what we do as athletes too, right? We show up, go to work, we do our best, we go home. But for so long, I wanted something in my hands that I could sell or give, and something tangible, right? Because if you're in the service industry, like a coach, or like anybody who uses their talent to serve somebody else for a moment of time, after that time is gone, that moment is gone.
That's
right? So like, have something like this, have something that will stand the time of like it will be timeless. And
I
that
mean,
goes
that's
for,
the thing about, with all the complaints we have about Amazon or self-publishing or these platforms, the amazing thing about it, and it's print on demand. So, when someone orders the book, it gets printed at that
yeah,
moment and sent the same time as any other book that's on the shelf. It might be 15 years from now. There's some kid or some older person or whoever
yeah,
somewhere in the world. It could be in India, and they, what is this? And they download
yeah,
it and they read it, and it transforms their life. So I like that idea, frankly, that
yeah.
anywhere in the world, for perpetuity, what we write and put up there can have an impact on people.
And there's really not too many other platforms you can do that with. Yes, you can do it with music. Yes, you can do it with movies. But other than those two things, that's kind of about it. And yes, like you mentioned, social media, like, yeah, we're all putting our stories out, but it's hard to get compensated for that, and it's hard to really create a ripple, right? If you want to create a ripple of positivity, of inspiration, of love and joy, like, get your message out like this,
Yeah.
and that
And
and
what the book forces you to, besides the cool feeling of having the book in your hand, as you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
uh, but and it's a completed creative work. There's something very kind of spiritual and satisfying about that. But also what the book forced you to do over this time. You had all these great ideas in the beginning.
yeah, yeah,
No doubt they were good ideas. But the book forces you to clarify or crystallize or make whole what you really believe about those things. And you work on it, and you think about, oh, I'm doing editing or I'm doing work. But what you're doing is saying, I have an idea of what it means to lead an inspired life on and
hmm
off the court. And the book is the platform, the forum with which you had to flesh out every dimension of those ideas Yes, helped a bit by me, helped a bit by our editor, Tom Votter, who's wonderful. And then you have this completed work that says, in your voice, and you found your voice, this is what I want to say to the world about this thing.
Yeah. And yes, thank you for recognizing that. And I also, just to share this too, when I first started this project, I looked around my life and I was like, man, I'm just surrounded by champions. I'm surrounded by amazing people, you know? And most all of us are, actually. If you really look at around your life, like just look at the champs. It doesn't have to be in sports. It could be in like the people that are thriving. Look at those people, right? Like really surround yourself. Connect with them. Ask them to interview them or whatever it may be. Coffee, and like pick up on their vibe. And that's what I did with this book and this project. And people like yourself, I found people like you. I picked up on your vibe, and I was like, man, let's collab. Let's work together. Let me show you my idea. Let me see if you resonate with it. And I think that's doable to anybody, anybody out there. Like, look around your life, find the champs and connect with them more. Because, and one more little nugget, you are actually heavily defined by your 5 closest friends and their 5 closest friends. So choose wisely,
Amen.
You mentioned Tom. Let's talk about the team real quick.
Yeah.
Talk about Tom and then talk about Alex, the formatter.
Yeah, I again, getting back to the idea of demystifying the process, a lot of the reason why people don't pursue creative things like this is they just think it's daunting. And what I try to do is to break it down. And so in our process, for example, you're the writer, and I help take you to completion, providing a variety of means of support along the way, part cheerleader, part accountability partner, part editorial advisor, part publishing consultant.
Yep.
And then we brought in Tom Votter, who writes for The Economist and many other publications. Brilliant writer, has written over 24 books, and he'll take what's already good and elevate it. Both, the grammar and language and composition, sentence structure stuff, the plumbing stuff, but also kind of helping to clarify, what are the key messages and sort of themes and sub themes. Then, I've worked with different designers. I have this great guy in Bucharest, Romania, of all places, who's wonderful and communicative and delivers great value and becomes a real partner in the interior design to decide how you want the book to look, but also to make sure that it's perfect for the upload to Amazon. And you're not dealing with the weeks of what the hell, pagination, I thought I got it right. You just don't want to be doing that yourself. You can. I don't think you want to. And then the exterior design as well. And yeah, so writing coach, if one feels that they would value from that. An editor, pretty good idea to have an editor. The best authors all have editors. And a designer to make it look and feel the way that you want to.
Yeah. I mean, look, guys, from this to this, so cool. And then the formatting, like Brian is talking about, you can't see right now with the light, but yeah, the formatting is really good. And there's QR codes to the podcast episodes in there. And then, I found a great artist and a really great photographer to put the whole team together. But, to anyone listening to this who has an idea, a project idea, who wants to get it to completion, contact Brian, because I'm just plugging you right now. This is just a plug for you. You helped me so much, man. You really did. And like you said, like the accountability partner stuff, that was really good. The cheerleader stuff was great. But to know that I got someone in my corner, because this is a very personal experience, actually. And a lot of people who have never written a book don't realize that this is extremely personal. right? You got to deal with your own emotions. You got to deal with the demons inside you. You got to deal with self-doubt. You got to deal with time management, and like figuring out a budget and all this stuff. And it's a lot. So I just, again, going back to appreciation for you, man, you really helped me get to this point. I can't wait for what's coming next, the whole marketing stuff and everything. And,
A great joy for me too. I mean, I must say, a reason why I do this, and I used to do writing workshops on the island, and so much of it became about catering and bill collecting or whatever, and people then leaving the workshop and not doing anything with it, later. And I decided instead, I'm going to do a lot of free stuff because I draw great pleasure from that. Free weekly write night and poetry jams and free hour of writing consulting, etc. And if all people, 95%, 99% of people just want to enjoy that, my work's done. I'm really happy. And a very small percentage of people, small number of people will decide they want to continue from there. So, but for me, it was a great joy to work with you, and I draw great pleasure out of doing this work.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and and like I said, I want to go back to Thailand and Koh Phangan and show up to Writers Night and share the book and be a success story. And that's one of the big motivating factors for me. I was like, I want to be a success story for Brian, before. Yeah, well, thank you, bro. Before we wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about flow. We've been kind of talking about flow this whole time. I feel like we've been in the flow with this conversation, but is flow something you can practice, or does it just kind of come?
I mean, there's some great books on that, and there's all kinds of psychological dimensions to it. But ultimately, I think it's setting yourself up with the right environment so that flow can come. Again, your writing space and deciding up front why you're doing it, writing an outline, creating the situation where flow can come. Then you'll be in that flow state a lot. But that's the first point, and doing that work to make sure that happens.
If you, the listener, want to be in the flow as a writer, contact Coach Brian. He will help you get in the flow. Brian, thank you so much, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. A true full circle moment. Before we go, tell everyone about how they can contact you, where they can find you on social media.
Through all the stuff that's on your metadata on the podcast and on available on the web. But you can contact me directly by email, briankgruber@gmail.com. Go to grubermedia.com. Go to sanscribes.com. You can go to Amazon and just punch my name in there, Brian Gruber Books, and see my 5 books. The most recent one being about Koh Phangan and oral history of the island, what makes the island special. But yeah, any of that, would love to talk to anyone.
Awesome. Man, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Actually, don't go anywhere. And for everyone else, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Stay inspired.